Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So, if you're a rogue player, you may be concerned with the upcoming changes to the rogue as a whole. And in this video, we're going to cover the Assassin. This was the main Paragon path that everybody would use on the rogue because it's the most reliable, could do very well in single target, and have very good sustained damage in multi-target. The Whisper Knife is a whole other kettle of fish, and we'll discuss that in a separate video. It got a whole bunch of changes, making it a ton more viable, and we'll have to compare it versus the Assassin again a little bit later once I finish my testing on it. So for now, we're just going to cover the Assassin and the adjustments they made to it. In particular, everybody probably wants to hear about Path of Blades. How effective will it be now? Will we use it? How much of a nerf has it caused us overall? Will it cause us to have a drastic change in the things we use? Well, first of all, let's jump to the changes. I have them nicely formatted and written up for you guys here. The first thing, which is actually very nice, is whenever you take damage, the penalty of reducing your stealth was decreased by 40%. So it'd be a little bit easier to regen stealth when you're in a fight where there's unavoidable damage. Still sucks that we lose stealth as a result, but at least that penalty has been decreased by nearly a half. Cloud of Steel doesn't really matter. You'll still want to use Gloaming Cut. However, Lashing Blade, massive change here, from that useless 50% crit severity to an extra 300 magnitude hit. This was made to give Lashing Blade stealth effect more of a punch when you have high natural crit severity. So when you have your crit severity at 90%, that 50% was useless. This makes this power basically deal over 1000 magnitude in single target. Just be aware it will be two separate hits. They won't stack on top of each other. You can see we use that here again from stealth, and there we go. We end up with our Lashing Blade basically hitting twice. This is the first hit for the 715 magnitude and the second hit for the 300 magnitude. This makes it far more competitive for single target damage. And the big reason for this change was to compensate a bit for the Path of Blades encounter. This did have somewhat of a buff if you consider it by dealing its full damage over 6 seconds instead of 10 seconds. This will help in multi-target content. You'll get that damage out faster, but unfortunately it will only apply the damage every 2 seconds instead of every half second. That means anything you use to gain an additional hit, for example your Band of Air, your Mythalar set, your Oppressive Darkness, Ferocity, Bloodlust, all won't trigger nearly as often anymore. However, we'll look at some math at how much that actually impacts it. As per before, the stealth version will still have half the duration, but because the base duration is 6 seconds, now that duration will just be 3 seconds, meaning you'll get one hit every 1 second for 3 seconds, and that'll be the full damage of the power. This change, they say, makes Path of Blades more viable in multi-target situations. Kinda, you get the damage out quicker, but you're missing out on all those additional procs as we had before, and that's the main thing they wanted to address here. They were going over companions, and they were improving stuff like Arania, Black Death Scorpion, Vicious Direwolf, and they didn't really want all of those things, I assume, to be overpowered on the rogue, so they kind of needed to fix the big outlier Path of Blades, which has that ability to trigger all those effects, but they could have just made it not proc those, and that would be that. But I guess they still want it to proc those, and it still will. It's still a hit 4 times and has the chance to trigger those, but it's been reduced significantly. And if we actually look at some math behind that, this is the difference we're looking at. So on live right now, if you're to use Path of the Blades, at least on my test build, you would get 53,000 DPS. Going to the preview with the new version, your Path of the Blades would give you 35,000 DPS. This is including all the bonuses like Oppressive Darkness, Bloodlust, Raw Pressure, Touch of Wind. I didn't include Ferocity in these tests, but that results in minuscule amount of damage. But the difference is pretty massive. You're losing nearly 35% damage from Path of Blades when you consider all those extra hits. But if you're to compare it to using, let's say, the new improved Lashing Blade, you can see it somewhat compensates, but not really enough. But this is not the only changes they made, and those other changes you will see actually do make up and compensate, at least in single target, where we have Wicked Reminder. The critical avoidance debuff from stealth now properly increases the target's critical damage taken. However, the value was rebalanced to 5%. This before was 10%, and they say it would kind of be overpowered for a single power to have 10%. I mean, it's not really. Fire and Force Threat is 10%, but okay then, that's what they wanted to do. But it does mean that our own damage will be increased against the target, meaning, yes, it's a bit of a buff to our damage, but it is also a buff to everybody else's damage against the target. But we are going to include it in our tests because we do want to compare the damage versus how we had overall before and how we have overall now. What's the difference? But before we do that, we'll move on to the next bit of updates, which is right here. We have some daily power and feats. So Courage Breaker gone up to 1800 magnitude to make it a little bit more usable, but its main advantage is to lower the enemy's damage by a whopping 15%. That could be pretty useful if there's content that needs extra mitigation, and you then get some decent damage with it. The Bloodbath daily power, not really usable, not really an AoE too much. You can end up just flashing around the battlefield and it ending early and not outputting as much damage as, let's say, just a Whirlwind of Blades would anyway, with then it having the damage buff. It's just not worth it. I mean, it's nice, great, they improve it, but it's not going to do much. However, we move to the Toxic Blades feat. Here they state that it's been worked to allow it to properly critically strike. So you're going to be able to benefit with your critical severity stat, boosting its damage by like up to 90% based on your crit severity. Then as a result of this rework, they have rebalanced it to have a longer duration, but a little bit lower base magnitude per stack. But overall, it should be about a 20 to 30% damage increase, and from my testing, I can confirm that is the case. In fact, its damage has gone up by nearly double, actually, than it was before because of it being able to critically hit. And it's very easy to keep up, to maintain, because the stacks last 15 seconds, and you only need 5 of those stacks. Now, additionally, the paired feat with Toxic Blades, Assassin's Target, was increased, and increased massively. This before was just really useless, had only 1% damage per stack, which is now 10% damage per stack. However, the max stacks was decreased from 10 down to 5, which is a good thing because you can now get to maximum stacks super quickly. In like 1 second of casting Duelist Flurry, you get those 5 hits off, and then you have your Assassin's Target at max, which, yes, is a 50% damage boost to your next encounter power. It's pretty huge. This makes it significantly more viable than before. And since it's matched with Toxic Blades, you have to choose either or. We have to decide which is better. And so we do a bunch of testing to see. And well, I had a look overall and done a load of testing on the different rotations you can do. For example, having Lashing Blade, Wicked Reminder, and Assassinate, where you will use Wicked Reminder at the beginning, then you use Lashing Blade from Stealth, and then you use Assassinate. That way you're stacking the buffs and trying to get the maximum amount of damage. An alternative is to use just Wicked Reminder from Stealth to gain the extra critical avoidance debuff on the target, then using like your Lashing Blade and Assassinate without their stealth effects. Or we could even try and test out what's up with Path of Blades. How much of a difference will it be now versus Lashing Blade when we look at our tests? And well, what I pretty much did was went through all the different rotations, done a 5-minute test on each of them just to check out how well their damage is. How do they compare with each other? Made sure all my stats were the same, the gear and everything. Ultimately, this is the data we end up with. A lot of time to go through everything, but here we are. And what turns out to be the best, at least for the test and the damage over time, using all of these bonuses, is in fact the new Assassin's Target with this rotation. Wicked Reminder, then you go into Stealth and use your Lashing Blade, and then you use your Assassinate. Now, throughout the fight, you'll just use Lashing Blade when it's off cooldown with Stealth. And yes, I was very thorough. I checked this against everything else. I even checked this against what it would be like to use your live rotation that is right now, where there is no point using like Stealth into Wicked Reminder. That effect was not working and is not working until this update actually goes live. So our option is like Stealth, Path of Blades in your rotation, so always sticking with that, then Wicked and Assassinate, or you can use Stealth and then Path of Blades whenever it's off cooldown, and then into Wicked and Assassinate. And ultimately, just using it off cooldown ended up being a little bit more damage just because you're using it a bit more often. You're sticking close to its cooldown versus what it is on Wicked and Assassinate, which have slightly longer. Again, this is over a 5-minute test. And of course, your only option is Toxic Blades there. You wouldn't be using Assassin's Target because that's useless. So we can see that the best they were getting was like 235,000 DPS. And so this is actually a little bit worse than what we can get now with the new update. But this again is single target damage. You can see all of the other rotations, and to be honest, it's actually not that bad with the new Path of Blades. Just using it off cooldown there with like Stealth, Wicked Reminder and Assassinate. It's not that far behind what you would have as like before on live. So if we're in a multi-target scenario, okay, we'll lose about 3% of our damage comparably, but it's not going to be the end of the world. We won't have as much like mixed damage, and we may very well want to build differently. Rather than having the Mythalar set and the Band of Air, we can go for other options. This setup will still be good. It'll still be good to fish for those procs because Duelist Flurry is something that gives you a ton of hits, and you can still trigger those things off it a lot. Just with Path of Blades having like 5 times less the hit count, yeah, that does bring it down quite a lot. And otherwise, we may very well want to be switching to Whisper Knife for mixed content anyway. When there's lots of ads and a boss to kill, Whisper Knife is already pretty powerful if you have the right setup, but with these new changes, it's going to be even more so, and it's probably going to be a bit easier to play as well. I will cover it in later videos. Ultimately, I wouldn't despair too much. Single target damage, just raw single target damage, is still going to be very good. You may not always want to go with Assassin's Target. Like if you're running with Path of Blades, you do not want Assassin's Target at all because it's just going to keep consuming those stacks you generate while it's active and not result in any real damage gain. You want to have those 5 stacks and then use a big hit and counter power to gain like that 50% damage boost on it. It's pretty huge. Just unfortunately, it's not that great in an artifact call, and that's why there will still be a debate, and it will depend on content, which is better, Toxic Blades or Assassin's Target. Assassin's Target, if you spread out your encounters, make sure you're always stacking up with a Duelist Flurry before you use an encounter. For example, you go here, we use our Duelist Flurry, and then we use our Wicked Reminder, use another Duelist Flurry, we use our Lashing Blade, another Duelist Flurry, and we use our Assassinate. And that way you're gaining like 50% damage on all those encounters. And you just keep doing that. It's just not that easy to squeeze that in an artifact call. Not as ideal, especially when running tacticians. So from my testing, single target damage for the Rogue Assassin is actually going to be a little bit better overall with the next module. In terms of multi-target damage, it'll be a little bit less. You'll still be able to run the same setups, but it'll be slightly less damage. Path of Blades will get its damage out a little bit faster, but since it can't trigger as many of these extra bonuses like Oppressive, Band of Air, Mythalar, etc., it's going to lose out on damage. I personally would like to see them increase the magnitude of this power to like 600. I know it becomes borderline a single target damage power, but if you actually look at those other powers, they have their own utility that make them competitive. Like Lashing Blade is still good with its extra magnitude hit. Wicked Reminder with its debuff also supporting the team like that. So I don't think it would hurt too much to just increase this magnitude by a little bit. But that's it for this video. Hopefully it was somewhat insightful. The effectiveness of Assassin is not changing a whole lot. A little bit down in multi-target damage, but a little bit up in single target damage. And I think a lot of us will be switching to Whisper Knife for multi-target damage, as their buffs were pretty significant, especially in the stealth regen department. And again, we'll cover that in a future video. A massive thank you to all these channel members for their added support, and we'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.